You're listening to Business Stories with Ryan Arcaracci, where I speak to business professionals from all walks of life. Thanks for listening, and let's get to it. Hey, welcome back to the Business Stories podcast. And I work with a lot of franchise professionals, suppliers, franchisors, franchise consultants. And I think a lot of people really want to know, if they are a business owner, when does it make sense to franchise? Should I franchise? How do I franchise? How much is it going to cost me? What's involved? There's a million questions. And my guest today is Mary Ann O'Connell. She is the founder of FranWise. She has been in franchising for several years, very long time. I'm not going to say how long, but you've been in a long time, Mary Ann, and you've got a lot of knowledge in your experience. So talk to us about your background in the franchising space and what inspired you to get into the franchising world.
All right. Well, first, Ryan, it's good to see you, and thanks for inviting me to be on.
Of course.
I didn't make a decision to pursue franchising. Franchising found me. And it was a long time ago. And if I tell you, you can all do the math and figure out how old I am.
Yeah.
But I was in the commercial real estate business. And here in Los Angeles, it was tanking in this particular time. Meanwhile, a friend of the man I was dating started a company called Money Mailer, and it was direct mail advertising, which back then, I need to say, so this makes sense, but this is 1979, 1980, and everybody advertised either in the yellow pages or in the local newspaper. And the founder of Money Mailer had been running a racquetball court in Ohio, and he was buying ads from this relatively new company called Valpak. And he realized, I'm sitting on the wrong side of the desk. There is money to be made in the other side of it. And he decided to franchise it. The guy I was dating was good friends with him, and we sort of divided the world, which in those days was Southern California. And our take of the world was the San Fernando Valley. And so I was still working in commercial real estate as we launched this, but we ended up being a multi-unit franchisees, besides the first franchisees into the system. And the education was amazing because not only was I suddenly in a franchise, even franchising was emerging. This is the year when the FTC rule comes into play. So there's now regulation and things are happening with some order. Meanwhile, I'm selling ads every day to franchised businesses and learning from there about brand funds and approvals and how things worked. So that was great. I did that end of it for 11 plus years. And then in that time got married and divorced from that same guy. So at the divorce, he kept the franchises and they wanted me to come inside, and I was their VP for franchise operations.
Wow.
So then I got the franchisor bug.
Yeah.
Went on to work there for almost 7 years on that side. Then I thought I could consult. And let me tell you, for most people who want to consult, if you've only worked for one brand, you don't know enough.
Yeah.
You know one brand really well. And I found that out the hard way. I have apologized to those first few clients. And so I went back on the other side and worked for a few local companies, but was really grateful when Great Clips and I found each other. And what an education, what an amazing company. So I learned franchising from that side, and I kept thinking there has to be a way to balance the communication, that everything works well when you're communicating well. So I thought I would consult with emerging brands on that. And at the time, I never thought I'd write manuals. It was information exhaust. It was in my head, write it down. It turns out other people didn't like to do that. So I ended up carving out a niche I didn't know I wanted or existed, but I did. And that's been 25 years.
Wow. So for people listening who are business owners and thinking about franchising or want to understand, what does that look like? Am I a good fit for it? Like, what are some things that they should be thinking about when it comes to considering franchising as a real opportunity for their business?
That's a good question. My first thing would be is if you can avoid it, don't do it. As passionate as I am for franchising, it's nothing like the business you currently run. It's expensive. It is steeped in legalities that change constantly.
Hmm.
Every time we change a party in Washington, the rules change.
Yeah.
Um, and if you are in love, let's say food, since most people think of franchising as food. If you're in the food business and what you love is creating and serving food and being with the people, you're not going to like being a franchisor
Hmm.
because now you're an administrator. You are having setting rules and making sure people follow the rules. You are now the father, mother, confessor
Hmm.
of all your franchisees. You're their marriage counselor.
Yeah.
You're everything. And if you don't have the money to hire somebody who understands and loves that, don't go there.
Yeah.
Don't go there until you can afford that. But I would say the big things that I see hurting, the big thing hurting prospective franchisors now is being undercapitalized.
Hmm.
Having talked to an accounting firm lately that does some of the audits, they're telling me that it's costing a franchisee about 250 to 300,000 to start, and it's generally 50 to 100,000 more if you're a food business. They're
Hmm.
just more working parts. Um, and that's just to get it to the point where you can go and offer franchises for sale.
Hmm.
And then you'll probably just be plowing all the money back in the business to the tune of 1 million or more before you really get traction and it starts to work for you. That's a heavy lift
Yeah.
financially. And there aren't a lot of resources out there to help franchisors do that. So you have to come in with some significant financing before you start.
Hmm. Hmm. Talk to us about like the playbook, the manual. Like what goes into a franchise manual to create good processes and really make sure that this is a foundation for success for a franchisor. Can you talk a little bit? It's probably a broad question, I know, but some of the major elements at least, can you share with us?
Manuals are getting to be less and less as every year passes.
Hmm.
The reason are two major things: joint employment and vicarious liability. Caveat here, I'm not an attorney. I just have to talk to them all day long.
Yeah.
And so I've started to understand this and I have to document it in the
Yeah.
manuals. That perception that you are controlling either the franchisee's day-to-day actions and or that franchisee's employees, because the franchisee is an independent contractor and you have no direct connection to their employees.
Hmm.
And the other is a thing called vicarious liability, which I jokingly refer to as being a know-it-all.
Hmm.
Um, when you give somebody advice, they follow your advice, and then it turns out it was wrong,
Hmm.
you share in that liability.
Yeah.
So as those two things get bigger and bigger and insurance companies get more and more nervous, we keep taking things out. But a manual is still really a great tool. I think every manual should start out with these basics. The first is a chapter on the culture.
Hmm.
If you go to Franchise Business Review, when they do their annual review of like what's important to franchisees, and remember, they're polling franchisees anonymously.
Hmm.
And it is culture. It is having a mission and a vision, having values, and then actually living to them, not just having them on the wall
Hmm.
and sticking to it. Thick or thin, sticking to that. That is most important in today's generation of buyers. The next thing you really need to put in there are all the things that your franchisee and as a franchisor you have to do to comply with the contract. The franchise agreement is built to be vague because
Hmm.
it lasts a long time. So they say do things this way or as in the manual, or do it as it says in the manual. And very few franchisors look at that. So
Hmm.
we go through and we either suggest or they may already have an idea in mind on how they want to track everything. So for those of you who are coming into franchising, think of getting rid of a franchisee the same way you would think of getting rid of an employee on steroids.
Hmm.
You have to have a folder on all your communications, anything you've done for them that's outside the norm, anytime they've done anything that is outside the norm without permission, so that if you choose to either ask them to exit the system or not renew them or not let them expand, you have a good discussion with the courts
Hmm.
as to what that's all about. So that's the second part. The third is breaking out brand standards from everything else you do. And the brand standards are what a franchisor can control. Many of my attorney advisors have taken it down to customer facing outcomes. What are you wearing? How do you greet them? What's the menu? What are you doing when you get to their home? Whatever the
Mm-hmm.
franchise is. If the customer experiences it, then the franchisor owns it.
Mm-hmm.
If it is that great idea on how you do that effectively, how do you schedule effectively? How do you get the unit cleaned up every day? How do
Mm-hmm.
you manage your inventory? You don't really, as a franchisor, have control over it. So that's where you break it in and you change your language. If I'm writing about standards, you must, you will, it's imperative, do it.
Mm-hmm.
Midwesterners hate that. They think it's rude and they want to put please.
Mm-hmm.
But I look back at little kids, and when you say, please do this, and they go, no, thank you,
Mm-hmm.
where's your argument? So don't
Right.
use please.
Yeah.
And then you can have tons of chapters on best practices. Here are your sales best practices. Here's your food safety. But with that one, don't go too deep,
Mm-hmm.
vicarious liability. Here are all the different things that are the secret sauce that make your franchise successful.
Mm-hmm.
Break those down. And then the last piece I think everyone has to have is the economics of the business. What are the KPIs? How are you defining those?
Mm-hmm.
And they've already signed, so you're not constricted by what you put in item 19 in your FDD. So now let's turn around and say your labor cost should be X% of gross sales, which you've already defined, your cost of goods sold, all of those particular pieces. Your product mix, if you're going to be in the top tier of our franchises, should be here. Are you brand new? Then based on our company stores, this
Mm-hmm.
is where you need to be. And I think if you get that in, your manuals are much smaller
Mm-hmm.
because it's mostly theory. And then what you do is you link to your training. Training is the physical part. It's when you go to the gym, your trainer doesn't give you a book on anatomy and ask you to read it before you do sit ups. They're going to explain to you why abs are important and they're going to demonstrate.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're going to say, join me, and you're going to do some together. Then they're going to stand up and look at you and correct your form. And then what? You're on your own and you're doing it.
Yeah.
So the same thing here, theory in the manual, activity and sensory memory in your training, and you got a good system.
So let's talk about FranWise. Where do you come into play in the process? What's the value you bring to an emerging brand or a brand new franchise? Um, what exactly are you doing? What's your process with working with clients you work with?
Processes can vary by what they want.
Yeah.
I know people think we write manuals, but what we are consultants. We're
Yeah.
consultants on operations and compliance with their contracts. And we have to be, otherwise, we can't write your manual.
Right.
So some people want us, they come to us very early. Maybe they've been to an attorney and the attorney has said, talk to this company first. I get a lot of my referrals from other suppliers who want to say to someone, before you invest in the attorney, let's go and we will do everything with you from helping you evaluate whether or not this is a financially viable business.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it worked for you, is it going to work for someone else when 10 or 15% of gross sales is going to the franchisor?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so we will work and go through all the 22 items in the FDD and help those franchisors know what they want to put in their disclosure document and therefore their contract and understand it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Take your time and do it right, because you can change it for future franchisees, but those changes are not retroactive. So
Yeah.
you want to make sure you get it right in the beginning. But other people may already have that, or they've been working with someone else, and we come in just to write the manuals. At which point, a lot of new brands will say, I have nothing, but they do.
Mm-hmm.
There's some way they've been training their own employees. There are ideas that they have. They know how they keep that business running efficiently.
Mm-hmm.
We do a combination of site visits, interviews, and reading everything you have. And then try and synthesize what it would look like for a franchise out of there. And then we annoy the heck out of everybody by asking them lots of questions that no one else has asked them to think about, but we really need to move forward.
Wow. Yeah. Do you have any in your career, any standout stories of your own that really just brought on a really good learning experience in franchising? Like any, whether it's just a story of adversity or struggle or a challenge, is there anything that sticks out in your head you can share as a lesson to everybody?
Yeah, unfortunately, and I'm not going to name names on these
Right.
because there have been too many people who have come to us. Some have decided to work with us, others haven't. But when we've turned around and said, this isn't going to work,
Hmm.
you don't have enough money to make it,
Hmm.
and, to just hang on. A lot of people think that every private equity fund is out there waiting to rescue.
Hmm.
Not always the case. So they don't survive or they get angry. They may come to us and say, well, we talked to another company and they said they can franchise us for $50,000.
Hmm.
To which my answer is, if I'm telling you it's 350 and all I do is this part of the consulting and the manual, why aren't you asking me where all the other money goes and
Yeah.
how it gets spent? And I don't get that money, so why would I lie to you about it?
Right.
So those, as time went on, I had understood. I took on more clients that were too risky in the beginning. I'm a
Hmm.
lot more discerning now.
Hmm.
But I love to see businesses that have just gone huge.
Hmm.
Painting with a Twist was one. I mean, they were already doing pretty well. We met at the Unconference
Hmm.
like 100 years ago.
That's going on right
And
now, actually, I think.
is that going on
Or
now?
it
Ooh,
just ended, I think. Yeah.
cold.
Yeah.
Um, but I met the co-founders there and we started as friends. And then they came over and said, would you look at our manuals? And that is a service we do for a fee. We will review them. And what I saw is that nobody was making the link between the agreement and what was in practice.
Hmm.
So it was interesting. It was costly for them and scary because they had to make a bunch of changes in their operating system because they were not always completely aligned with the language in the agreement. But it was wonderful to see them adapt, to move, to get over the fear and do it. And now, I mean, they're huge. They've acquired all their competitors and other brands. So those are the kind of stories I love to see.
Yeah, I love that too. I mean, one thing I noticed too, there are times when there's a little bit of miscommunication and a franchisee will want to do things sort of their way. The franchisor has their process. And there's always people out there that are kind of I don't know, the lone wolves, and they try to kind of rewrite things their own way. And sometimes that causes a lot of friction between the franchisor and the franchisee. So can you talk a little bit about what helps build that trust and better relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee? What do you recommend franchisors do to maintain that positive relationship so that everybody wins?
That's a great question
I
because
try.
I think I can give you two completely different answers on this.
Yeah.
Remember, I said before in the manual, you want to be clear on your culture.
Right.
I have a concern now, and I might have exaggerated this a little bit, but if I buy into the culture that you sold me, Ryan,
Hmm.
and I love it, and it's what I wanted, and it makes me feel good about going into work every day, and then you do sell the company, and the fund that absorbs it or the platform that absorbs it
Yeah.
has a very different culture.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm in this and I'm not, I can't just leave the franchise and go back into my line of work. I
Right.
will be, by the time that agreement runs out, 5 years out of my business.
Yeah.
You don't catch up from that.
Yeah.
So I do think culture is strong, but you can't have a business that's simply based on feel good.
Hmm.
You have to look at what is the role of that franchisor. There are rules. We do have to call out when you have the wrong sign up.
Hmm.
If we walk in and your salon is filthy,
Mm-hmm.
We have to say something because everyone is sharing the brand. So to me, if you really think through what your business is going to be, and it is not personality dominated, it's
Mm-hmm.
got to be a model and maybe a place in society where
Mm-hmm.
it's dominant, then I think that goes the better way. And now go back to screening your franchisees.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're all in such a hurry. I think as I get older, and I'm just like, yeah, whatever, people rush
Yeah.
around. But everyone is in such a hurry to bring people in. And they may talk about profiles and they may talk about how careful they are. And I can look at some of these systems and say, no, they wanted the money
Mm-hmm.
and they took the money. And this isn't always the franchisor. Sometimes it's outside services that they're using. Um, they didn't sit down and take long enough to really narrow who they were looking for,
Mm-hmm.
because a narrow field means slower sales.
Right.
But slower sales, more often than not, relate to more sustainability within the franchise community.
Mm-hmm.
So slow down, take your time.
Yeah.
Did
No,
that answer
that's
your question?
yeah, totally, totally. I want to talk a little bit about because I mean I'm in this with client tether. I'm in the software space and the technology space. I want to ask you about your thoughts on and opinions on technology and processes and getting everything, all these elements in franchising, because there's so many things, there's so many gears moving right in this engine. How do you recommend technology? What technology do you recommend? How do you approach? I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, but how do you approach, you know, the technology side of it, especially with what we have going on in the world now with so much with AI and automation and everything? What's your advice when it comes to technology for brands?
I love technology.
Yeah.
Again, if you think back to starting in the 80s in
Yeah.
franchising, we didn't have cell phones.
Right.
I mean, basically, we were dinosaurs and we were scratching things on rocks at that
Yeah.
point. It also meant that as a franchisor, if you were going to grow, you needed an army of people who could go out in the field
Right.
to help launch them and then, do brand audits.
Yeah.
Technology has made that so much easier.
Yeah.
Also, data is important.
Hmm.
Well, data is important, but information and knowledge is more important. So I do think you need to start out with some sort of platform, and please, God, not Google Docs. It
Yeah.
is not meant to do that in a franchise system, and there are great systems that are out there.
Yeah.
So start with that and make sure it will interface with everything else you're going to need.
Yeah.
Marketing runs the world these days,
Right.
and they have so many disciplines within the very broad name of marketing. So, how is all that going to come in, and what data are you getting back, and what data are you pushing out to your franchisees? I think having a way to gather their financials without asking them to send them in
Hmm.
monthly and quarterly and annually,
Yeah.
much better.
Yeah.
Again, in the older days, when we would go out and you had a franchisee that might be in trouble,
Yeah.
you were out there for 2 days assessing the problem before you ever had a discussion about how to fix it, or
Hmm.
you stupidly went out with one fix in mind, whether it was the right one or not.
Yeah.
Now you can be prescriptive. You might see a problem about one of your franchisees before they see it,
Hmm.
because you should understand the causes and effects
Yeah.
better. So I'm all for having a full suite of marketing that you need for communication within the system, communication with the customer. I think that you should be gathering as much financial data as possible to help your franchisees better understand their business, to have more accurate FDD so that your items 6, 7, and 19 look great.
Hmm.
Um, I'm also a big believer that if you can automate things like supply chain, if you can, I'm actually running out of ideas on all the things you can do,
Hmm.
embrace it,
Hmm.
not just for the sake of embracing it. So AI seems to be the magic word for everything. And guess what? It's been around a whole lot longer than we're pretending it
Yeah.
has
It
been.
has. Yeah.
If it makes sense for you right now to make that investment in an AI platform of some sort that's going to benefit everybody,
Hmm.
then do it. But don't waste, if it's a precious resource, don't put it there yet. Sometimes older gets you through
Hmm.
until you can really develop it the way you want to.
Yeah. What do you say about the objection I hear a lot? Franchises really concerned about, I mean, it baffles me because franchisors will really be concerned about budgeting for marketing and for scale and for growth of technology and development. They spent a lot of money already to become a franchise. And now when they have to invest more, there's a little bit of a pushback because they're like, oh gosh, I have to spend another few thousand on this and that. I mean, what is your advice about the anxiety and the fear around understanding or not understanding that in order to grow, you have to invest? And it may be a difficult battle to deal with that internally. But if you don't do that, you're going to lose more, right? So how do you help people handle that hurdle, that emotional hurdle of the
Can
money
I be
side?
rude and just say drugs? I mean, anti-anxiety medication.
Right.
No, not totally dismissing that, but
Right.
I think it goes back to two things. When
Yeah.
you started, did you understand what your role as a franchisor is?
Yeah.
And your role, according to the USPTO and the Lanham Act, is to do everything to protect your brand.
Yeah.
So if growing and protecting your brand means you invest in technology to get the word out, to make sure it's a more consistent experience across your entire brand, you do it.
Hmm.
And you have to go in with the money for that. But okay, everybody in franchise development, turn off right now because you're going to hate me for this next comment. But I think there's a lot of pushback internally that
Hmm.
comes from how long do I train? Oh, by the way, technology and training, that's a
Yeah.
fabulous match.
Right.
But they're looking at how long am I going to train? How much is my tech fee going to be?
Hmm.
How much are my royalties? Because it's harder to sell when you have to explain things. But if you can explain it and by gathering data, show the benefit of whatever you're paying for that, then you should be funding
Hmm.
immediately and your franchisees should be behind you.
Hmm.
Again, slow down and choose the right ones who think like you do
Yeah.
so that you don't have to fight. Just like hiring an employee, you
Yep.
hire for what is it? You hire for attitude, train for skill,
Hmm.
hire for mindset. Same thing here with your franchisees.
Hmm.
So I do think that's a big part of where the pushback comes. It's slowing down the development folks, and so they put, and I don't even know if they're aware they're doing it, that they put pressure on the committee that's putting the new FDD together every year to hold things in, or even worse, we have the right to set up a marketing fund. We have the right to collect a tech fee, but we're not doing it now because, oh, my poor first franchisees can't afford that.
Hmm.
Well, then you don't have a system set up right.
Right.
You need to collect it from day one and explain to them it's a giant savings account.
Yeah.
And when we're ready to take that tech leap, when we are ready to do that big regional piece or a national ad, we're going to have money in the bank.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, this has been good, Marianne. I really appreciate it. It's been very informational, and educational for me and everybody listening. So, if people are interested in getting in touch with you, they're interested in franchising, or they are franchising, but they just need more help, what is the best way to contact you, or do you have any places where they can find content or information about what you do?
Sure. And can I say one thing before I give them all that?
Please
Hang on,
do.
folks.
Yeah.
One of the things with vicarious liability is when you think you have to be the expert on everything.
Yeah.
If you want to back off from that, and sometimes also back off from the perception of joint employment, use your suppliers.
Hmm.
You don't have, if you're a commercial cleaning service, you don't have to create videos on how to use the floor buffer.
Right.
Your industry association already has them, and
Yeah.
it doesn't have to have your name on it. You've proved your worth by doing the homework, finding them, and hopefully negotiating a great price.
Yeah.
So go out and then focus on what it says in item one of the FDD that you do.
Hmm.
Okay, with that said,
Yeah.
you can reach me directly at info@franwise.net. That's FRANWISE.net. You can find us at our website, which is franwise.net. And
FranWise.net.
also, there's a whole bunch of content that is not me. I started a blog I started a podcast
Mm-hmm.
during COVID, and it is some of the top CEOs and founders in the franchise world. And it's called What's Your Effing Business? Podcast about franchising. And you can find that through our website also. Listen to what these people are telling you. They're telling you the mistakes they made and the
Yep.
successes they had, and they don't have an axe to grind.
Yeah. Well, great. Thank you, Marianne. Marianne O'Connell, FranWise. Go to the podcast, look up her website, read her blog. She's a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much, Marianne. You know, there's always people out there, if you're listening and you're in franchising, that can help you with everything. I can help you on the tech side. Marianne can help you on the growth development side. There's people out there that do videos and content, and there's tons of people out there in the community ready to help you. So do not hesitate to look us up, find us. We are out there. We want you to succeed. So we're there to support you as much as possible. So thank you, Marianne. It was good talking to you, and I do hope we can keep in touch.
It was a real pleasure, Ryan. Thanks.
Hey, this is Ryan with the Business Stories Podcast. And if you're a franchisor, franchise consultant, broker, or just a small business owner, you've got to check out clienttether.com. It's an amazing sales automation tool that is revolutionizing the industry. If you want to learn more, go to clienttether.com and inquire within.